In 1964, President Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act. Apollo 1 launched into space, and a half a world away in the Tonkin Gulf, a torpedo attack on the USS Maddox sparked a U.S. reprisal attack on North Vietnam. 2 days later, on August 7th, Congress authorized President Johnson to use all means necessary to defend Southeast Asia and wage an undeclared war.
Our story is about Air Force Major Fred Cherry, Navy Lieutenant J.G. Porter Halliburton, and other Americans captured and denied their rights during the Vietnam War. The men took responsibility for themselves when deprived of all rights.
Well, yes, it was during the years of the Cold War, and everything was to stop communism. Politicians, people in leadership, decided to stop it and not let it spread. So that was why we were ordered to start to attack targets in North Vietnam.
The United States took responsibility for defending the free world, and that put Americans in harm's way. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, used statistics to determine the United States Vietnam War policy.
I think he approached the war, as more as a manager than he did a leader. He loved to analyze things, and so he tended to measure success in the number of bullets that were fired or bombs that were dropped or Viet Cong that were killed, and that was not a real measure of success at all.
Lieutenant Halliburton's F-4 Phantom was shot down over North Vietnam on October 17, 1965. North Vietnamese Colonel Nguyen Van recalls,
"We used everything to shoot at American planes. We were defending our country."
5 days later, Air Force Major Fred Cherry's F-105 Thunder Chief was shot down.
And I broke my wrist. I tore up my shoulder very badly, and I broke my left ankle.
Major Cherry was the 43rd American and the first African American to be imprisoned in North Vietnam.
His interrogator ripped up Major Cherry's Geneva Convention ID and yelled, "You are all criminals." From their viewpoint, Americans were just another foreign invader, like the French, who propped up a corrupt, non-communist dictator and rained destruction from the skies.
660 Americans were captured and imprisoned between 1964 and 1973. Their responsibility was to follow the Code of Conduct for the Armed Forces of the United States or face court-martial. Their rights were supposed to be protected by the Geneva Convention, 1949.
It was naive for some of them to think that they're going to be protected. War is hell.
Well, in terms of rights that we actually had from the North Vietnamese, they were practically zero. All of those rights are detailed in the Geneva Conventions of 1949, and they are very, very specific in terms of communications with your family, how you're to be treated, the level of medical care.
We were constantly harassed and tortured often for little things. Communicating, tapping on the wall is our primary method of communicating. It took up some time, but we never gave up communicating.
I said, "Hi, how are you?"
Navy Commander James Bond Stockdale's F-8 Crusader was shot down 6 weeks before Lieutenant J.G. Halliburton and Major Cherry. Commander Stockdale and 4 other top-ranking officers took turns issuing orders at the Hanoi Hilton during their 7.5 years of captivity.
Using the tap code, American POWs were ordered to resist any form of cooperation. Their captors could tell they were following someone's orders because they all went on hunger strikes, refused to bow in public, and refused to meet with communist country newspapers. For not cooperating, they were beaten, chained, and put in solitary. Longest-held civilian pilot Ernest Brace recalls, "Men broke under torture and felt like they had failed."
Commander Stockdale assured them that they had done their best. He modified the code so that tortured prisoners faced with permanent injury or death could make statements, but laced their confessions with fictitious names. Navy Commander Jeremiah Denton gave an interview while blinking out torture in Morse code.
He concluded, "We were prisoners under barbaric conditions, but we had our own spirit, and we prevailed."
The North Vietnamese thought it would be demoralizing for a Southern white like Lieutenant J.G. Halliburton to take care of Major Cherry. That strategy backfired. After months of torture and solitary confinement, taking care of Major Cherry saved his life and gave Lieutenant J.G. Halliburton something to live for.
In contrast, 8 POWs cooperated with the North Vietnamese and returned home earlier than the others, in clear disobedience of the order, "First in, first out, we all go home together." When the earlies were released in 1968 and 1969, they said that they had been well treated and were sorry for bombing schools and pagodas. A 9th American seaman apprentice, Doug Hagdell, was a Navy cook blown off his ship and picked up by North Vietnamese fishermen. He was the only one ordered by Navy Commander Richard Stratton to take early release. He memorized the names of 242 POWs and upon release reported about their poor treatment.
The publicity led to improved conditions, but the POWs were still a low priority in the big picture of ending the war that had escalated to over 500,000 Americans in Southeast Asia by 1968.
Anti-war protests catapulted from peaceful to violent. America landed men on the moon.
The draft switched to a lottery. Peace negotiations in Paris stalled, and the war dragged on.
Initially, I was just a member, and I attended various conferences that were held, and then I was coordinator of Southeastern states. We wrote letters to elected officials all over the world. We did interviews on television.
My husband was shot down in 1971. Wives were already going to Paris. They were involved in on the periphery of peace talks and all kinds of things.
The League forced those in power to face, if not accept, responsibility.
1968 presidential candidate Nixon promised Vietnamization, end the war, and bring the prisoners home. President Nixon's bombing of Cambodia increased anti-war protests, but by 1972, the bombing of Hanoi and mining of the Haiphong harbor brought the North to the edge of collapse. On January 27, 1973, the U.S. negotiated the release of POWs as a condition of ending the war.
Clearly, Vietnam prisoners of war took responsibility. They took responsibility for the only thing they could, their own conduct. Commander Stockdale, Major Cherry, and Lieutenant Halliburton, among the first captured, were among the first released on February 12, 1973. They were welcomed home as heroes.
I had already said I'm never letting the North Vietnamese adversely affect my life again. And I think I realized at that time that if I continued to hate them, then they would affect my life, because hatred is really a poison in your soul. And so that's why, you know, when I walked out through the gates of the Hanoi Hilton to go get on the bus and get on the airplane and go home, I just turned around to that building and I said, I forgive you. And all of that hatred, all that armor just fell away right there. And it was not a Christian act. It was an act of self-preservation.